Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to a brand new episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And today, my special guest is actress Ashley Hargrove. Welcome to the program, Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay, now the film that Ashley Hargrove has selected for today's episode is The Abandoned, released in 2006. And let me see if I have my notes here correctly. And she has the DVD cover
Yep.
as well. Directed by Nacho Cerdá, starring Anastasia Hille, Karl Roden, and Valentin Ganev. So, when did you first see this film, and why did you pick this movie?
I first saw it actually several years ago, probably at least 10 years ago, because I know it came out almost 20 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It was just late night, and they were doing some of those films to die for night. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it was either on HBO Max or Showtime or Cinemax, one of the three, and it popped up. And I love trying to watch, tons of different movies to get different perspectives on them. And it just turned out to be a really intriguing story. To some people, it has a slightly slow start, but I just thought, the way they build it up with just a handful of characters gave it a unique side to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I also wanted to point out in this film that even though it's meant to feel like a horror story or a ghost story, there are some moments that do feel a little bit eerie, but at the same time, there are some moments where I would have to question whether or not there were some things that needed to be corrected in the story, like the fact that, and I hate to spoil it, the fact that uh the fact that Mr. Misharin, the guy who works for the Russian government, somehow is related to the main protagonist, and the fact that he is, I don't know if he's a spirit or if he's undead. How did he have the information about her? I don't know. It just really, I don't know. It was one of those things that I think left me questioning whether or not this was something
It,
that.
it,
No,
it,
go
it
ahead.
was. It was a plot hole, definitely for sure. There, that the notary it's pretty much deemed that he's dead, and he somehow brings his children back to a house where supposedly they were supposed to have died 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that part I was scratching my head a little bit. And when I first watched it, I didn't even think about that at all. Like it just bypassed me. It was just like, why does that guy look so familiar there? And then I see him later. I was like, okay.
No,
So it took
yeah.
me years to finally think about that part.
Mm-hmm. So that one, and I did like the scene in the film where she did meet with her actual brother in the movie, who we've
Nikolai.
yes. What was his name again?
Nikolai.
Oh, Nikolai. Yeah. When she was reunited with her brother Nikolai, even though they were almost like separated from when they were young, um we we may have hints that after he was separated from his birth parents, that he somehow, I think, got enlisted in some sort of military army, I believe, and that he once had a relationship with this girl whom it was suggested that they had a relationship, and it never worked out, I guess.
Yeah, because there was a little spoiler part towards the end where they talk about, your doppelgangers seeing them that they're bringing your death. And when
Hmm.
supposedly the woman showed up there, I was like, yep, he's
Hmm.
about to go.
Yeah, I did notice that the only time I think that the characters were supposed to meet like their end was when she's in the car, and this man who was driving her all the way to the estate, she had this sort of, it was supposed to be like a dream, but I think it was more like a premonition. It was like I was trying to piece together what was happening, and it just, I don't know, it just didn't make sense when I first saw that dream sequence that I saw, and then all of a sudden it just turned out, oh, it was basically meant to be about the end, basically meeting their deaths, basically.
Well, it was like when she does get to that farm, and the guy gives her a ride in its truck. It's like you see the truck never moved. It turns out the truck belonged to her parents 40 something years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And It's like, what happened to that guy? You never see him again. He just somehow disappears. So for a bit, I was thinking, I was like, was this a ghost driving her, or was that, even her dad, in another form where he picks her up somehow? And so there was like several little pieces, trying to put together, but at least with the tone of, seeing the house kind of come alive around them, that at least still, kept me interested in the movie. And that's why I ended up, still watching it now, because it's just they have that unique twist to it. It's just,
Mhm.
yeah, there were definitely a couple little plot holes here and there.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have like so of all the actors in this film, do you have like a favorite moment like from one of the actors that you thought stood out to you or just made you give you the made you feel like there was something that you liked about this picture?
I think it was probably the scenes at the with the dad with the birthday cake, because even though he's the villain, the one
Mhm.
that's bringing them there, it's just the way he's so calmly at the table, just lighting the birthday candles and just humming and,
Mhm.
just talking about what time it is. And, he's like, oh, nothing's wrong. I'm dead. You're about to be dead with me. It's like, yep,
Mhm.
it's just a normal homecoming party together.
It is. It does feel like that. So, in terms of like the atmosphere and the aura of the picture, I mean, at first I wasn't sure what to make of the film because when you saw the opening with the mother who was in the truck and she's basically dead and the babies are in the truck and it's 40 years afterwards. I wasn't sure if it was gonna be like, your traditional ghost story type movie or if it was gonna be like something else. That was my thoughts when I first saw like the opening scene of the movie. And then as the story kind of moved along, it just went into this like other almost like alternative storyline where it basically just went from this woman who was going to meet with her brother to all of a sudden now it's like a head, as you mentioned, a head scratcher, like things that don't make a lot of sense and I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Well, it's kind of the same like how, the brother ended up there, because there's that scene where she ends up in the water, trying to leave the house, and
Mm-hmm.
he finds her and he brings her in and she like freaks out, tries to beat him up. And then that's when he tries to explain. He's like, we were both brought here for something, and shows her the picture. And you see how their lives were messed up beforehand. Like, she even has a daughter that just basically, it's like not a bad relationship, but you can definitely tell their lives were still pretty cruddy. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a part where I actually wonder, even though he says there's really nothing you can do, to change what has to happen. I wonder if they really had ended up, escaping in the truck where she even talks about it, but she decides to go back into the farm, what would have happened if she just taken off and let them go to the barn first and just
Mm-hmm.
driven away and didn't stop. And she's like, no, no, it's okay. I'm going to go in there. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. So did the film remind you of any other types of movies, like ghost story type movies, or maybe horror films that feel eerily familiar, or maybe just makes you?
I couldn't really think of ones that were very similar to it, because the way they made the house seem like it was alive because it was turning back the time itself. I think that's what gave it that extra edge, because I don't really know a whole lot of films that have done that before, where the house is like, you know what? We're going back 40 years. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. This just came to me as I was thinking about this, and I know I may have seen clips of it or maybe people would talk about it. It made me think of The Shining, basically, because I mean it's a I
Well,
don't
in a
know if
sense, yeah, in a
yeah, I mean
sense.
I mean it could be like is it a ghost story film? Is it all in the main character's head? Um, I mean
Were they
the
there years ago and were already technically, meant to always be there?
Yeah, it felt like it, um, because of the fact that even though I just thought about this now, it does feel similar, but I wouldn't say it's entirely the same. It's an entirely I mean, they feel eerily similar when I watch it. And, the other ghost story film that I did wanna mention, was and I know it feels similar to this movie, The Innocents, which is loosely based on the ghost story, The Turning of the Screw, starring Deborah Carr, basically about whether these ghosts are real or not, or The Others, which
I
I
remember
have
that
not
one, yep, Nicole
yeah.
Kidman.
Yeah, or another one that I thought was really good that I saw was The Devil's Backbone by Del Toro, which I thought had a great twist, great spin on the traditional ghost story. But in that film, the ghosts were more like victims warning the children in that film that there is evil in this place, and it's not them; it's the ones who work at the place that are making it worse. Which I thought was a
And
pretty
I felt like in The Abandoned that the brother got the shaft the worst.
yeah.
It's like his life was worse, and then what happens to him, you're just
Yeah.
like, "Wow, man."
Yeah, I mean it was very much like I couldn't tell whether I would sympathize with him or whether I felt really bad that he had to go this way. But I just thought it was a pretty interesting story. I did read I think I did read on the Internet Movie Database that Richard Stanley was one of the guys who later helped to polish the script because the original screenwriter who wrote the story, I guess he was doing something else, and so they had to bring in another screenwriter to make it a little bit polished, which I think does make some sense in this case. But I thought it was a pretty interesting ghost story film. I wouldn't say it's the perfect ghost story film because of the flaws, but I think it's an interesting ghost story movie in general.
And the other trivia I was reading about at one time was that they said they originally wanted Holly Hunter to play the lead, but then they decided to get someone that was a little bit more unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was actually a better idea because I think most of the movie would have been too focused on like, oh, it's her. She's gonna have to carry the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And that I just don't feel like she would have matched up with the brother,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Yeah.
Even though this character, Anna, she was kind of mean. She was a little vicious.
Yes, she was. So so since I watched this ghost story film, did it remind you of any actors or direct or any movies that you were on that felt sort of eerily similar? Or maybe did you watch or did you know any actors that worked in other maybe like horror movies or ghost story movies that you know of?
Not on these ones in particular because the story just has that unique twist to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the only one I could ever think is, like you mentioned, kind of like the others in a way. I don't know anyone from that, but just the twist to it itself, I feel like it has that eerie atmosphere for it. Most of the stuff I've worked on is a little more subtle. I've done some horror, but definitely not that kind of horror. It would
Mm,
be interesting though to try that because I really love the setting that they chose for it.
mm,
The house was definitely one of those creepy ones, but it also had a slight, I know this sounds silly, but it kind of had the Resident Evil video game feel
mm.
because of the basement, where it's like,
Ye-
you don't go into that. No. Uh-uh.
it,
It's
it,
like,
it
yeah, why not? We'll check for power.
yeah, it is that interesting. I mean, it is an interesting movie, and I know that it is an it is an interesting independent film that was a Bulgarian, Spanish, British co-production because I know that even though the main character is supposed to be American, she's the only thing I noticed that in some of the scenes when she's trying to sound American is her British accent sort of slips up a little bit here and there.
Yep.
Yeah, which I understand that some actors try their best to keep the accent, but somehow their real voice slips up a little bit, which I don't know if it's that hard to do if you knew anyone who had to do an accent that it was hard for them to do it or
I mean, I've read about some where that, and I've done different accents myself before where sometimes, you can get all the way through it. And there's some actors that you'll watch where you're like, really? Like, I did not know they or British or Australian, and they manage to hold it the entire time. Like Nicole Kidman, Hugh Jackman, when their accents are not kicking in,
Mhm,
they do, really well with holding them back. But I know for myself, it definitely takes a little practice.
mhm.
But she overall held it pretty good. But the guy that played Nikolai, I think for him it was easier because that just the way he spoke. Because I remember watching him in The Orphan. He had a
Mhm.
very small part in it, but instantly, I recognized that voice of his, and I was like, "Wait, that's him."
Oh, it really is. But I know that when I was younger, I never watched horror films. I mean, I wasn't what one would call a horror fan. I only discovered like watching horror films much later as I was growing up. But I always find ghost stories to be very interesting because I mean, they are in a subcategory of horror, but they're not like there are some ghost story films that are trying to be more subtle, that don't rely too much on the overuse of gore or blood or violence. There are some that do, and then there are others that there's the film called The Haunting, which was later remade in the late 90s.
Yep,
And then there was like the Haunting of Hill House. I know I haven't seen it on
the
Netflix,
remakes
which
of that too. Sequel was bad.
yes.
Sequel was
Yeah, I tried. I mean, the only other ghost story, it's not a ghost story film, but it's like a ghost movie, is the 13 Ghosts, which was the
yeah.
William Castle movie that they did in the early 60s. And then I remembered I watched the remake, which I was not particularly a fan of that movie. I mean, it just didn't feel like a scary movie to me. It just felt more like it was more like trying to be scary, but it felt like it wasn't. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've seen some movies where they try to be scary and it feels like they're just not that scary to me. It just feels like they're relying too much on overdoing it, is what I think they're doing.
Well, and then The Abandoned, they held back on the blood, like, they tried to keep the gore and levels down because they really did wanna focus more on, the house in a sense being alive and trying to use that instead, so the dark, unsettling atmosphere for them was the better way, I think, because I kinda think if they just killed multiple people there, it wouldn't have really done anything for it,
Mm-mm.
just because of the way the setting was designed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for them, that actually worked well doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not what one would refer to as a horror fan, where you just have to instantly put out like the number of films or characters or whatnot, because I try my best to avoid watching too many horror movies because some of them I mean, there are some that are like in a franchise mode that are more like it's more like in I would have to go back to when I was younger. It's more like the Power Rangers whenever they would have the super villain of the
There's like
day.
27 shows of that now.
Yeah, which I know. To me, horror franchises, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like what is the villain going to do for how to top off this murder or this kill? In franchises like that, it sort of reminds me of like Power Rangers whenever they would do like the villain of the day and how are they going to defeat this villain and how would they top that? I felt like it's kind of the same thing with franchises to me. It's like how do you top that with trying to murder somebody who is, I mean, not likable, but at the same time, I just felt like I cannot put my mind to watching those types of movies. Um, but yeah, I mean, and also when I try to watch like some scenes, just like the kills only, it's like some of them are ridiculous and some of them are just like so graphic. I imagine they would have to like pixelate or censor it so that you don't get too much of it in your head, I guess.
Well the good part is when I worked on a horror film several years ago, they're, learning the behind the scenes of how they actually did some of the deaths. When you saw how they do, you're just like, "Really? That's it? That's how you make it look like it?" So it was a lot more subtle that way. It made things
Hmm.
easier, and then, of course, you have some of the very cheesy horror films you watch where the death is so over the top, you're just basically on the ground just laughing like, "Yep." You're like you're like, "That's not scaring me, we're good."
I mean I mean the Friday the 13th movie kills, I could pretty much handle it. I mean, the Nightmare on Elm Street films, I don't know, there's something about those death scenes. It's surreal and it's almost like cringe to me at the same time. I know that they're supposed to be fake, but it's like I can't watch this. It almost makes me.
Well, in each film that those go up more and more, they try to make the deaths as cheesy and corny as possible. Because that was one of the things I noticed in the a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies before the remake is each death there was always like cheesy lines that, and I love Robert Englund. He did really good as Freddy Krueger,
Mm.
but just like all of them would have the cheesiest kill line to go with it to match the death, and you're just like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the one-liners and the puns, or as they call them now, dad jokes.
Oh
Uh,
no.
yeah. But yeah, it is pretty much like that. So, um, do you have any upcoming projects or any assignments that you're working on right now, so that maybe my audience could see them, if it's available in the future?
Yeah, we actually have one that it has some distribution right now, and it's also getting more platform. It's a cheesy PG horror, so don't worry if you watch it. I
Mm-hmm.
promise it's not going to have you on the ground like, ugh. Although they don't have happy endings, I'll give you that. They're not meant to have happy endings, but we have Unnerving that's on Amazon Prime Video,
Okay.
and there's a couple pieces of it also spread on YouTube, and it's coming back again with the new anthology sometime next year. But so the cheesy ones are available now. We also have Carolina Mine, which is a drama suspense story about an unstable college woman that ends up with her professor despite her father's warnings. But when they're forced to separate, it pushes her completely to the edge. And over several years, it causes consequences to her and her family. So that is going to be out of editing in the next month or so. And after the festivals, it's going to have select theaters and then different streaming platforms. And then we're also working on a horror comedy
Mm.
that involves vampires. So that one's going to definitely be fun because I haven't done a lot of creature type stuff, so
Mm.
getting to do a more kind of slightly cheesy horror side to it will
Mm-hmm.
definitely be fun.
Yeah.
Will it have a few deaths in it? Yeah, but it's gonna definitely have the comedy with it where you just be like, did they really just say that line? Yeah, they're probably gonna be doing that.
Yeah, I don't know, if it's horror comedy, I always find it more appropriate. The only types of horror comedies I liked when I was growing up were, and I don't know if you just saw the teaser for this one, the new Beetlejuice sequel that's coming out later
Yep.
this year. I like the first one. I mean, it's in the horror comedy mode. It's very funny and uh, it's very much something that I enjoyed. Another one that I don't know if one would call this a horror comedy. Well, my uncle called it a dark comedy. The Gremlins films, the first one and the sequel.
Gizmo.
Yes. Um, I never thought this one was a comedy. And this goes back to the franchise I was referring to earlier. Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, which I actually was not aware that that movie was made as a horror comedy because it was, as one would put it, was very meta. It was very self-referential. It was self-aware, some of the scenes. That
Yeah,
I
kind of like Bushmaster.
uh Witchmaster. Oh, wait, was that one self-aware too?
I kind of think it was in a sense, but yeah. So the demon, he had they gave him another name, but yeah. So people get their little wish, and just they were so comedic that you're just like, I thought this was supposed to be horror. But did you ever watch the Leprechaun series? All of them?
Yeah, I mean, those movies, they were very corny to me as I watched them. And I mean, I know it's low budget and it was made by Trimark, which I think no longer exists. Now it's owned by Lionsgate and they have their
They
own
they
library.
they they did get cheesier as they went. It was also the same with the Child's Play movies that eventually ended up being called Chucky later on,
Yeah.
where the first film of each one was actually kinda chilling. Like, I remember watching Child's Play by accident as a
Mm,
kid because it came on HBO Max, or well,
mm,
at that time, it was HBO when I saw it, and it
mm-hmm,
actually was a little bit scary. He had a couple of those, corny lines that were snuck in, but
mm-hmm,
they actually were meant to be a little chilling, and then later on, it just at that point, you're just ready to see what Chucky would
mm-hmm.
say next.
Yeah, exactly. And I do. And when it comes to like vampire movies or other types of horror movies, I liked Near Dark, the Catherine Bigelow movie, which was released the same year as The Lost Boys. I know I haven't seen that one, but I don't know. When it comes to vampire or werewolf movies, I'm not what one would refer to as a Twilight fan because I know those movies came out when I was
Sparkles.
yeah. I know those movies came out when I was in high school. I never read the books. I don't know. It just didn't. I mean, it was meant to be appealing to, I don't know, was it like tweens or
It was like it was a combination in a sense. It was kind of meant for like mothers that were over obsessed with Robert Pattinson, and at the
Mhm.
same time, it had the teens group, so that way they could fight between the Taylor Lautner and Robert team and everything. It wasn't my thing. I mean, they weren't bad, but just those scenes where he talks about sparkling, I just couldn't help it laughing at that part.
Yeah.
For me, for vampire movies, if you want one that's kind of comedic, this one also has a series out, but I like the movie first that they did was called What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh
That
yeah.
movie was pretty
Mm.
and because to see the way they did it, they would sit in front of the camera talking about being vampires, like, yeah, this is what happens to us and stuff. And then another one that gets a little slightly scary, but also was meant to have comedy in it was An American Werewolf in London.
Mm-hmm.
I think that came out around like 1980 or somewhere right around there.
81. It came
Um,
out in 81.
so I was pretty close, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love that movie because
Mm.
of just the way they designed the werewolf. Yeah, it had its scary scenes, but it actually was meant to be borderline comedy at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that way, you could bring in that one group because some of the lines, where he ends up in the zoo and he has to steal the balloons from the kid, and that the mother asks her child, she's like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "An American man just stole a naked American man just stole my balloons." You're just
Yeah, yeah. I mean, interesting thing, that film came out the same time that The Howling and Wolfen also came out. So it was, I think, a year for werewolf movies around that period.
I think it was. They had to. It was before I was born, but yeah, there's like certain years they'll suddenly have that genre, all the types of the same type of movie come out
Mm,
back to back.
yeah. I mean, I know I never saw the Underworld films. I know that when I was at Universal Studios Orlando, they had like the makeup horror show where they always tell you about, the history of horror movies and makeup, and that Universal was known as the House of Horrors because they had like your favorite horror movie monsters over there. And speaking of werewolves and vampires, and I remembered this film came out when I was in elementary school, Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, which you
Yeah.
mentioned. And I know that the film was not a success and people were not that happy with it, I imagine. And also uh, and also because I saw this on TV, but I know the original was made in the 30s, The Mummy starring Brendan Fraser, which I mean that movie and the sequel, I never saw the third one, but I remembered seeing only the first two. Um, they were very much like trying to, do basically going back to the Universal horror movie storyline. Basically, you have the hero, you have the tough guy, you have the smart
The
guy, and
damsel in distress.
yes. And also you have the bad guy in the movie, and it's meant to be fun. It's meant to be like a throwback to those Universal horror movies from when they made them, but it's also kind of fun and it's also sort of action packed, I would say.
They ended up remaking it again. I remember several years ago as well when Tom Cruise did a version of it, and that one was considered much more dark, but I preferred the one with Brendan Fraser because
Mm.
it added that little hint of comedy to it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean I like that one, and I know I haven't seen him in this one, The Whale, which he won an Oscar for around the same time
Yep,
that
I heard about that.
yeah, I mean, around the same time that Everything Everywhere All at Once won almost every major award: Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. And I think if I had to pick a favorite Brendan Fraser movie, and I know this is sort of back to horror, it has to be Gods and Monsters with him and Ian McKellen. And I thought uh, both of them were really good in that picture, and I thought they should have won for that movie. But it's the Academy. What are you gonna do?
Now, if you want a type of mummy movie that'll put you a little on edge and is creepier,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more claustrophobic style, is The Pyramid.
Okay.
That one came out, I think, probably just after The Abandoned or similar, but um, it's I think like a group of archaeologists and a reporter that films it for them. They go inside a pyramid and just they start to die off in different ways, but there's a myth or legend, that they're actually learning about and discovered part of it supposedly true. And just the way they filmed that one, even though it was slightly lower quality, is just, yeah, that was definitely claustrophobia style right there.
Yeah. Okay. So we're running a little short on time, but so before we end this show, do you have any last statements or recommendations besides the ones that we just discussed about for my audience, just to get in the mood?
If they want just a fun cult classic where they'll just basically be over laughing all the time, Killer Clowns from Outer Space was
Oh,
always a top one for me from the 80s.
yes, that one
It's a cheesy fun.
hmm yeah.
But yeah, so definitely that one just for something fun. But if they want to go back like more, it's definitely try American Werewolf in London if they haven't yet.
Mm.
If they want something that'll mess with your brain a little bit, the first Mirrors movie, not the second one, because they do really well with the tricks of, even though Kiefer Sutherland gets a little, screamy in it, as I like to call it, just the tricks with the mirror, you're like, yeah, I don't want to look in mirrors anymore. So that
Oh,
that one was always a fun one to watch.
okay. So the first Mirror movie is that what it's called? Mirror? Okay.
Mirrors.
Oh,
Yep.
Mirrors. Okay. All right. So where can my audience find you if they want to maybe connect with you in
They can find me on Facebook, Instagram. They can definitely find me on YouTube. I run a video game blog plus a nostalgic time blog, and sometimes talk about movies on it, sometimes for them. So Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, aka X, where I talk about books and films sometimes.
Mhm.
IMDb as well, because constantly, it gets updated with a bunch of projects. So they can definitely find me in several places. And I have a website coming soon as well. That's almost complete.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to see it. And as always, if you have other movie recommendations, you're always welcome to come back to the show. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I enjoyed having this chat with you and talking about different types of horror movies because it's one of the genres that I was not a fan of as a child. But as you get older, I mean, the horror movies, I liked like the older type horror movies, and then some of the creature feature movies that they had like maybe in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, and just like the oh my goodness, like the B movies that came out like in the 70s, 80s, and
Yeah.
90s decade, or like just practical effects horror movies that don't have to rely too much on CG, but just like the old-fashioned special effects that feel so real and don't have to require using a computer sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I did not mention this one. Fright Night I thought was really good.
Are we talking about the one from like the 80s with Chris Sarandon or
Yeah,
Sarandon? How I always say it's Chris Sarandon. I actually met him once, but yeah, they remade it at one point. I remember Colin Farrell,
yeah.
and I think
So
they're remaking it again, if I'm not mistaken.
oh really? I did not know that they
I
were
thought
gonna
I read something about it. I
okay.
wouldn't. I mean, if they do, you never know.
Yeah. Okay, so and one last thing. Did you ever get a chance to meet any would you say acting heroes or celebrities that it was like a real honor to meet them?
Uh, I know the voice actor Billy West was definitely one of my favorites to meet at a Comic Con. He's the
Mm-hmm.
one, if you ever remember, he's from Futurama. He did Doug Funny, Red Eminem. I really love his voices that he does, and he's really fun in person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I met Tyler Perry on one set years ago. Seth Green was pretty funny to work with on another piece.
Mm.
But definitely they were all really fun. And of course, some from Star Trek. My husband's a big Star Trek junkie. So we met like Brett Spiner and all of them. And
Mm.
so they were definitely very fun to get to speak to and actually, hear about some of the projects they've done.
Mm. And I also heard that you got a chance to speak with Tim Curry, not in person, but maybe like on an
Twice. Yeah.
oh twice.
Twice with him and Henry Winkler. Yeah. They were doing
Oh,
some pieces through GalaxyCon where you could purchase a couple of minutes to talk to them, and they even sometimes will give you free minutes on top of it. So I
mm,
got to speak to both of them for a little bit.
mm. I mean, I only remember Tim Curry when I was younger, and this is going back to the Nickelodeon days when I first heard him as Nigel Thornberry on the Wild Thornberries. He also
Yep,
did,
and the It Clown.
yes, and It's the Clown from the 1990 miniseries It, which was later remade, and they did parts one and two uh
Yep.
just a few years ago with, I think it's Bill Skarsgård as
I
the,
can never say his last name right, but I know who you're talking about.
yeah. I mean, he's part of the Skarsgård family, like their father is Stellan Skarsgård, and I don't know who's the oldest or who's the youngest. To me it's like the
I
Culkin
don't never
brothers.
keep track.
No.
But
I
I remember Jim Curry first from Home Alone 2. That's where I first saw him originally because
mm,
I saw it in theaters when I was a kid.
mm.
So that's where I first saw him. And then I think after that was the It movie. And I was like, "Ooh, that's creepy."
I mean, was he a very nice person to interview?
Yeah.
And
He was definitely down to earth. Like one of the favorite things he said is like, Ashley, that's a very romantic name. And I'm just like, dude, you already got me in the first minute.
uh and I know I did this episode before. I did interview another podcaster or former podcaster who did like him in the movie Legend with Tom Cruise.
I
And
remember that.
yeah, and he was good as the as darkness in the film, which I thought was pretty interesting. And another movie with practical makeup effects and good practical effects
Yep.
by Ridley Scott. Always good to see him in this film. And I thought it's a great film. And I did actually hear from my previous guest that the director's cut, he mentioned, or he said that according to him, the director's cut doesn't add much to the story. Rather, it takes away from the story, is what he told me. So if anyone has never seen the director's cut, it doesn't really add much to the movie. So the theatrical version, for those who have not seen it, would be the best one.
Oh yeah. And then Henry Winkler, he was fun as well to talk to. He was really nice. Like he was trying to find that picture of the character he was doing for one of the Monster Inc. type shows. Like he's like, wait a minute. He's like, I found it. He's like, here we go.
Oh,
So he was definitely fun as well to speak to.
mm.
And I think
All
my
right.
cat finally left the room if they were going off during
Okay.
it.
All right. So, and I'll say one more thing before we wrap things up. I did want to meet Henry Winkler because I know I've seen him in Happy Days and I've seen him in some Adam Sandler movies that he did.
Waterboy.
Yes. Um, but I thought it would be nice just to meet him. But now that I have talked to somebody who did meet some of the actors that I did want to meet with, I just feel really blessed and humbled to do this. So thank you, Ashley, for being a part of this episode, and I hope that
Oh,
we
thank
meet.
you.
You're welcome. And I hope that we meet again for another episode. So thank you for being on the show. And until then, I'll see you at the movies. And thank you for being on the show, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.